Well guys, hello, welcome to another edition of 20 Teams UNCUT podcast. We'll be trying to do a little bit of a focus on Glasgow podcast for this month to try and highlight some of the work that's going on that we're asking you to support as part of our Christmas challenge. And so to that end, we've got the one and only Paul Harkess. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well, Pete. How are you?
I'm good. You're not actually from Glasgow, right? You're from the other side of Scotland.
Yeah,
the worst side.
The good side.
No, come on, west is best. We know that. Right? You've seen the light. You've come over here.
They say that the wise men came from the east.
So usually we have hats on because we're just that cool. It's actually Baltic down here. This is downstairs in Hope Hall.
It's particularly cold today.
It's a good job you've got a lovely flowing beard here as well to keep you warm. I'm pretty jealous of that, Paul. So.
Thank you.
Right, Paul, you are one of our newest church planters over in, Kilmarnock area, just kind of south of here in Glasgow. Do you want to tell us first off, how did you come to know the Lord and what was your upbringing like? And then we'll work into how did you hear about and get involved with 20 schemes. So where'd you grow up? What was that like?
So I grew up in a town called Musselburgh, just outside Edinburgh, down the road for Niddrie Community Church actually. From a young age, I was brought to church by my dad, who became a Christian when I was about 2 years old. My mum became a Christian when I was about 10. So going to church on Sundays with my wee brother was part of the normal routine for us growing up. We went to Musselburgh Baptist Church, and that was where I first heard the gospel of Jesus. I think probably as a wee boy I would have said that I had a childhood-like faith. I thought I believed the stories that I was being taught from the Bible, and I certainly prayed that the Lord would be my saviour from a young age. But I think probably experientially that didn't really translate. Certainly as I went through secondary school, I became quite rebellious, dabbled in drugs, chased after girls, enjoyed a good drink. And that continued for, right through my teenage years into my early 20s. And during that time, I basically stopped going to church. And I would have said that I wasn't a Christian eventually. And I would have probably acknowledged that I was an atheist. I believed that this life was really all that there was. And so you have to just make good of it what you can. And for me, that simply meant trying to fall in love with a girl and get married and maybe having a good job, settling down, having a couple of kids. That was all I really wanted out of life. I was on that trajectory. By the time I was 20, I met a girl that I fell in love with, and I was happy and content in life. I had everything lined up the way I wanted it to be lined up, but then something changed for me quite significantly. In 2005, I was on holiday in Bulgaria, and when I went on this holiday in Bulgaria, on the day I left to go on holiday, my granddad died. I'd been living at home. At the time, my granddad had also been living with us because he'd been unwell, and his death shook me up quite significantly. It caused me to ponder my worldview as I reflected on his death and thought about the fact that, if we just live here and have things in this life to live for, and then we die and there's nothing after that, well, life is actually pretty pointless. And as I reflected on that for the first time in my life, I felt really alone, even afraid. And I couldn't get any sense of peace as I reflected on this. And one day on this holiday, something quite unbelievable happened for me. I was feeling very upset and miserable. I was crying, I was alone, I was afraid. And there in that moment, I could sense the Lord's presence, this Lord that I'd been brought up to know and love and trust in. And I fell under great conviction for my sin. I knew that I'd been brought up to believe in this God and to give my life to this God. And I knew that I was a sinner. and that my sin deserved to be punished. But at the same time, I also knew that this God was merciful and gracious, and I knew that he was wanting me to give my life to him. And this sort of sense of knowing his presence there in that moment basically changed everything for me. For the first time in my life, I knew that this God was real. I knew that there was much more to life than simply living to have a good career, or to settle down and fall in love and maybe get married and have kids and have your own home and things like that. But I knew that there was a God who made us, who we could know and have a relationship with through Jesus Christ, his Son. That night I prayed, asked God to forgive me for my sin and to come and to take control of my life. And there in that moment, I sensed the Holy Spirit coming upon me, and he was ministering to me, and he was showing me things in my life that were out of sync with the gospel of Jesus. And he was saying to me, Paul, all of these things are going to change now because you belong to me. So that was the moment I became a Christian.
What age were you then?
I was 23.
In Bulgaria?
In Bulgaria, of all places, yeah. So I wasn't around other Christians, but having been brought up in the Christian faith, having heard the gospel as a young boy growing up, the Lord made that real to me. And yeah, my life changed completely from that moment on.
So that was early 20s. I mean, you're now an old man, right? You're now 40?
40.
Your party, wasn't it, a few months ago? So when did you sense kind of call into ministry or that kind of process? Because you were you at Musselburgh for a bit doing some stuff? You were then met the guys at Niddry 20 Schemes. How did all that kind of come? Yeah,
so when I became a Christian, I was working in banking at the time, and it was probably about a year or two after I became a Christian. I remember sitting in my office one day, and it probably sounds weird and strange, and I wouldn't use this as a kind of gauge for whether someone should go into Christian ministry or anything like that, but I just kind of sensed that the Lord might have plans for me out with banking. And yeah, I guess I didn't really say too much about that to anybody. I kind of reasoned with myself, right, okay, if I was doing something other than banking, I would want to be involved in some kind of full-time Christian ministry, so to speak. I never ever thought that I could work in a church, because I thought that the only job in a church was to be a pastor. And for me that was out, because the idea of getting up week by week and preaching a sermon was something that I would never do, because I've always been a little bit shy and nervous about being up front and being someone speaking to people, so I thought I could never do that. I kind of thought that maybe I could be a missionary. I quite enjoyed outdoors. I was a bit rough. I thought I could maybe live in a jungle somewhere and tell a few...
You've got the beard for it, right?
I've got the beard, exactly. I thought I could maybe, share my faith in that kind of context, and maybe just about come back to a church that was supporting me in that, and tell them how it was going. So I kind of thought, yeah, maybe I could be a missionary. So I was pushing a few doors on that front a little bit. Did a few short-term mission trips with an organisation called Ayrshire, once each year for a number of years. But as I was kind of pushing the door on that front, I was becoming more involved in my own church setting at home. Some of the elders in my church were kindly discipling me and nurturing me in my faith. And my old pastor, John Shear, he was nurturing me as a young preacher as well. This guy who thought he would never ever preach a sermon and would never want to preach a sermon somehow happened to find himself beginning to preach on a semi-regular basis, maybe 3 or 4 times a year or something like that. And that kind of sort of became more of a thing for me. And eventually in 2013, I resigned from my job in banking, convinced that the Lord was leading me into some kind of full-time Christian ministry, probably in a church back here at home, because actually while I was pushing this missionary door, overseas and so on, I was actually seeing there was a great need here in Scotland, the so-called land of the book. Things were dark here. There was a great need, a lack of faithful churches right across Scotland, and particularly in the housing schemes in Scotland.
Like, you've always been like banging that drum about the housing schemes. The first time I met you, I remember you talking about a scheme in Musselburgh, and like, what was it about the housing schemes? What was it that made you think, yeah, no, this is where we need churches?
I think a massive part of it, Pete, would have been the fact that, well, I grew up in a poor housing scheme myself. So me and my family, we lived in a scheme known as the Wimpeys, just on the outskirts of Musselburgh, because Wimpey Homes built that scheme back in the day. And so it was always just known locally as the Wimpeys.
And you're a bit of a wimp, so that makes sense.
Thanks. So we grew up in that scheme. My mum and my dad, they were young Christians, and I think growing up in a conservative church, and probably, as parents, I guess parents have to wrestle with this kind of stuff, thinking about what's right for their kids and so on. We ended up moving out of that scheme by the time I was about 10 or 11 years old. They were worried that I think I would get involved with certain people and do a lot of bad things. So we moved out of that scheme. Didn't change who I was, because I did a lot of bad things anyway, because I'm still a sinner, and it doesn't matter where you place a sinner, they'll find ways to sin no matter where they live.
And so that's part of the reason then why you're like, yeah, there's no churches there, that's where...
Absolutely, there was no church in our scheme. In fact, I tell a lie. There was an old parish church there that has since closed. So there's absolutely no church in that scheme where we grew up. And in addition to that, I think when I did some of my training at Musselburgh as a ministry apprentice, I was studying at Cornhill. I also had the opportunity to dip my toe in a little bit to what 20 schemes were doing. Did a day or two a week as a volunteer at Nidri to see how you guys were doing. I found it very stretching, actually, because the church that I'd grown up in was faithful, conservative, probably a bit more traditional. We had one or two people from my kind of background that would go to our church, but the general culture of the church was more middle class, I guess you could say. And going to Nidri, it felt like it was more contextually reflective of the area in which they were doing ministry. And yeah, that opened my eyes. I found it hard at first, actually. Yeah, it was stretching for me, seeing ministry done in ways that I'd never really seen it done in my own church that I'd experienced growing up in. But over time, I grew to fall in love with what was being done, and yeah, I've got a massive respect for the ministry of 20 schemes. And
so did you see yourself at that stage, like, I want to be a church planter now, I want to go to one of these communities and just plant a new church, that's what the Lord has for me?
Yeah, I think over time I was thinking maybe, but I had a few questions about whether I was the right kind of guy to go somewhere, make connections with people, try and get something going off the ground, try and draw people around this vision for a future church plant. I think I wanted to give it a go, but I wasn't fully sure whether I was the right kind of guy for it.
That was my story too, like, see the need, right, and there's no one doing it, but like, oh, I'm not sure I'm the guy to do this either. Like, yeah. One of the things that's always encouraged me with Mez and the guys at 20 schemes is just that message of, look, the need here is so great, no one else is coming. Like, if the Lord's put that on your heart, then let's give this a shot. Let's like get behind it and see what the Lord's going to do, right? He always uses jars of clay. He always uses Muppets, because then he gets the glory and not us, which is encouraging. So, which is what's happening, right? So now you are not in the east, but in the much better part of Scotland, the west of Scotland. About half an hour, 40 minutes south of Glasgow in Kilmarnock, in the kind of greater west of Scotland area. How'd that happen? How did you end up in a church just outside Kilmarnock, planted a church in one of the roughest schemes in Scotland in Onthank. How'd that happen?
Yeah, so I think basically what happened was when I was doing my ministry training, my own church, Musselburgh, they had thoughts at that time of perhaps planting into the scheme in which I grew up in, the Wimpeys in Musselburgh. For various reasons, that didn't quite materialise. The leaders decided to go in a different direction with what they wanted to do. And so I was approaching the end of my sort of initial phase of training, if you like. I was about to finish up at Cornhill, the sort of summer of 2018, and I was looking for work, basically. And a guy that I studied with, Nathan Owens, he's down at a church in Kilmore's, Maxwell Church, which is about 5 minutes outside Kilmarnock. And he found out about my situation, and we met for a coffee, and he had this crazy idea about perhaps me coming to serve with him in an assistant minister capacity at Maxwell Church, but really to head up a future church plant in Onthank, which happened to be the place where they filmed the BBC miniseries, the Scheme.
So like people probably don't know about that, certainly if they're not from Scotland. That was pretty notorious here. What was it, 10, 15 years ago maybe?
Yeah, along those lines, yeah. So yeah, it kind of made a few people a bit of local mini celebs, I guess you could say, from that area
that guy,
off the back of it.
Happy as Larry, couldn't be happier.
Yeah, that was Marvin, yeah. Yeah, he became a bit of a celeb locally, yeah.
So it basically was like some kind of, almost like, what do you call those things? Not Big Brother, but like it followed real people's life in this scheme, but it probably chose people right at the margins or the extremes of the scheme, didn't it?
Oh yeah, I think it gave a very narrow portrayal of what life is actually like in Onthank.
I remember there's like scenes of guys like jumping out the window when the polos are at the door and stuff, and like.
Yeah, I'm not saying that stuff like that doesn't happen. All I'm saying is it's not the whole story.
Yeah. Which is what people locally probably thought as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
They thought it maybe painted a one-dimensional when there was a lot more going on.
Yeah.
But that stuff is certainly there, and Onthank is statistically one of the poorest, one of the roughest areas of Scotland, and yet there was no gospel church there, right?
No gospel church in Onthank. I need to be careful about saying that locally, because there was a Church of Scotland there, but even saying that there's no Church of Scotland there can be a little bit of a controversial thing to say locally. There is no gospel church in Onthank, and that's why we want to plant a church in Onthank. 5,000 people that live there with no opportunity to hear the gospel of Jesus. What they need more than anything else is to hear the good news that Jesus Christ came into the world to save them from their sins. They don't need food banks, they don't need other forms of mercy ministry. They need the gospel of Jesus preached to them by a local church. All right.
And so again, it's been encouraging for me to get to know you guys and Nathan a little bit over the last, I guess, year and a bit or so. You're now fully signed up with 20 schemes. You live in the community. You've just bought a house in the community as well. So you did live in a kind of rental. You now bought a house. Since you've moved down there, you've met the love of your life. Surprisingly, she's not blind. She's from Australia. Her name is Miriam, right? And she's moved into the community with you as well. Anything else going on in your life just now that's exciting?
Yeah, my lovely wife is expecting our first child, a wee boy. We've named him Jackie, and he is due on the 11th of January. So we're getting ready for his arrival.
Quality. And so let's chat a little bit about how 20 Schemes has been able to encourage you or maybe support you guys over the last year and a bit. Because again, a lot of the money that we're hoping to raise this time of year goes to support people exactly like you, people that are from Scotland, never thought they could be the kind of guy to do this, but who the Lord's placed there and who's hooked up with us in order to get that support and that training so that we'll see churches planted. So what's it been like kind of being part of 20 Schemes? What's been helpful? Give some chat about that.
Yeah, I think, we were planning to plan. We were hoping that we could develop a partnership with 20 Schemes, but partnering with 20 Schemes has really just helped sharpen the focus for us in a number of ways. First of all, the training, coming here every couple of weeks to meet with other planters is brilliant. Studying God's Word together, thinking through important topics related to church and church planting, church revitalisation is just so helpful for us guys on the ground. But not only that, in terms of like what we're actually learning, it's actually helpful in terms of the camaraderie as well, definitely. Because doing this it's not easy, and it can be quite isolating at times. But to have that sort of wider support from fellow brothers and sisters who are involved in the same thing, and reading on the experience of other brothers and sisters who have gone before us, is just so helpful for us guys on the ground, as we learn from one another, as we learn from one another's mistakes, and as we support one another, and all of us have one another's back, you know, and that's just so encouraging. And I think my wife Miriam, she's just really appreciated that as well. Big transition from her, not only marrying me, but leaving the, let's
giddy
just
heights
say,
of London.
the giddy heights of South London, to come to Scotland, but not just Scotland, but to come to Onthank and Kilmarnock. Big transition for her, and helpful in that transition's been coming alongside the other planters' wives as we meet together each month. It's been really helpful for her as well.
And Miriam's actually just wrote a blog as well to kind of highlight again some of the work for the Christmas challenge, so hopefully that's going out in the next week or two, so people will be able to read a little bit of Miriam's story herself and how she's settled in from the heights of London now to a scheme in Kilmarnock, which is, again, I'm really encouraged by that too. As you are working to plant a church, so again, people are hopefully going to give money to support you building a team, starting some ministry, all that kind of stuff. What have you been doing so far? Like, what's like? How have you been getting involved in the community? How are you formulating plans for this church in Onthank?
A big part of what we're doing is simply trying to live our lives in Onthank. So it's not enough for us to simply have a house in Onthank. We have to be quite deliberate in actually living our lives in Onthank as well. So trying to do things locally where we can. One of my favourite things that I enjoy doing is boxing. I think it's a brilliant sport. I've always loved boxing. With football, it would be my favourite sport. Just so happens that there's a boxing club in Onthank, and I've been enjoying going there just to do a bit of local fitness with people locally in Onthank, and get to know some of the people who go there, and get to know them through doing boxing with them. So that's one thing that I've been doing. In terms of what we're doing currently, in terms of meeting and so on, there is no church in Onthank currently. We're working towards that. Very recently, we put a short video just asking people, local Christians, who'd be interested in join us on a Sunday afternoon to pray for a future church in Onthank, if they would come round to our house to join us in praying for that. And that's been very encouraging for us. We've had a few local Christians come along to that, to join us as we pray and look to the Lord for a new church in Onthank. So that's been very encouraging for us as well. And in addition to that, one of the things that's been a good outlet for us as well is football. It's taken me a bit of time to get to this stage, but we've over my time living in Kilmarnock, I've gotten to know a few guys locally and who have friends who like playing football. And we've got a regular game of 7-a-side football. Which
would you not tell me it used to be like pure scale riots until you took it over and kind of brought some order to the mess?
I think that's a little bit. It was a little bit disorganised and things, but I think when you're starting something off from not having anything to going somewhere with something, there's always going to be difficulties in getting something started, and I think a large part of it was probably that. We now have a good committed core of local guys. A couple of them have connections to Onthank. We've got a guy who lives just round the corner for us, another guy who lives around the corner from our new home in Onthank. Miriam's gotten to know the partner of one of the guys who lives in Onthank. So that's been an encouraging outlet for us as well in terms of getting to know people.
That's great. And then going forward then, we're looking to start building a team. So there's hoping women's worker in the future, some kind of help for you guys in the ground, maybe some interns to kind of get some stuff going. Is there any specific kind of prayer points that you want people to maybe be praying for off the back of this, or any maybe specific people you're like, no, this is the kind of person that we would need to be involved? So what is it? How can people be supporting you basically?
Sure. Well, I think a big need for us is we do want to grow our team, and we would love to take on an intern. We would love to take on probably a women's worker, I think. I think that would probably be the first appointment I would like to see happening. It's fair to say that, you know, I've been in Kilmarnock for 4 years, most of which has been on my own, married last year, joined by Miriam, but most of my time has been spent going after the guys for practical reasons. But yeah, there's a lot of women in the scheme with a lot of needs. We'd love to see a mature woman ministering to some of these women and pointing them to Jesus. So you could pray for that. We would love to take on someone who would fulfill that role. Love to see an intern gospel worker come alongside us as well, to help with the work on the ground, focused on evangelism and things. Those are the kinds of roles that we would like to see occupied as we try to build a team round about us and look to do other ministry stuff in the future.
And so next steps then, so you've moved into the community, you've started to form a little bit of a team. Are you going to have a church next week, or what's your kind of going forward? What's that look like?
Nah, I don't think we'll have a church next week. Well, you never know. The Lord might, do something incredible, but I really don't think that we'd have a church next week. I think as we kind of formulate a team, I think we would like to really start talking through what a church in Onthank is going to look like. What are the things that we are going to be committed to as a church in Onthank, what that looks like for us and how that plays out on the ground for us as well. We probably want to try and dip our toe a little bit into doing a couple of events, just to again build further connections. It's good to build connections through doing things with people with different organisations that are already running stuff locally, but we want to run a couple of things as well, and perhaps something for kids. There's a lot of kids running about in Onthank, but there doesn't really seem to be too much for them to do in Onthank, so perhaps we could offer them something in that regard.
Quality. Well, again, being part of 20 Schemes, our hope is that people will just hear a little bit of your story and be excited about what the Lord has done to save you, to show you the need, what the Lord is doing currently, and what the Lord, we pray, will do going forward in this really needy part. So again, if anybody's listening and wants to get prayer points, have you got an email address that we can share at the bottom? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I've got an email address.
So we'll fire that at the bottom. We are desperate for people to come and give their lives to this as well. People want to be interested in that, and that'd be great. We also are praying for people to give to this work. Again, there's massive need there, and so the money we're raising here for the West of Scotland will go to support not just your training and the support of you and Miriam, but also these future interns and gospel workers. But we're also, and I'm particularly desperate to see other people like you, Paul, other people that, again, similar story that I had, that see the need, maybe are hearing that and feeling like, you know what, these places need churches, the Lord needs to do something there. But maybe you think, I'm not the guy to do it. We want to pray that the Lord would use even silly little conversations like this to stir people's hearts, to see that need, and to just be willing to give their lives to it. To say the thing we're looking for most in people is willingness. You love Jesus, you love the church, you love the lost. We want to support and train and support the rest of that. And again, people might be listening and give their lives to that too. But so that's us. Thanks for your chat.
Thank you.